Okay, for I've been asked questions, or I've been questioned by people. Why do I wear the yellow star while I'm doing my YouTube videos? And I have tried to incorporate it, my answers in some other videos. I think I'm just going to do one particular video this time answering the question. In medieval times, even going all the way back to the 7th century, starting with the Muslims, and Muslims forced Jews to wear uh, patches and other things to signify that they are Jews. And then, of course, the Christians, the Catholics began that practice later, and it culminated into the practice of the yellow star in Nazi Germany. Now, one thing that I want to point out: Christianity cannot escape their crimes against the Jews. They cannot escape. They won't be able to escape the punishment of their crimes against the Jews. And like I said, this is about why I wear the yellow star during my YouTube videos. And when we get down close to the finish, I think you will understand. If we go to wikipedia.org, uh, Wikipedia's Martin Luther and anti-Semitism, there is um, it is this is a long read. Everyone should read this, but within it is a portion that's called influence on modern anti-Semitism. So who was it? Who was it that put so much influence on modern anti-Semitism? The prevailing view among historians is that Luther, remember, he was the father of Protestantism. All Protestant congregations have their root in Lutheranism. If you are a Protestant, Luther is your founding father, so to speak. But this does not absolve the Catholics in any way, shape, or form, because Adolf Hitler was a Catholic. The prevailing view among historians is that Luther's anti-Jewish rhetoric contributed significantly to development of anti-Semitism in Germany, and in the 1930s and the 1940s provided an ideal foundation for the Nazi Party's attacks on Jews. Reinhold Levin writes that whoever wrote against the Jews for whatever reason believed he had the right to justify himself by triumphantly referring to Luther. According to Michael, just about every anti-Jewish book printed in the Third Reich contained references to and quotations from Luther. Diarmaid McCulloch argues that Luther's 1543 pamphlet on the Jews and their lies was a blueprint for the Kristallnacht, which anniversary we just witnessed. Shortly after the Kristallnacht, Martin Sass, bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Thuringia, published a compendium of Martin Luther's writings. Sass applauded the burning of the synagogues and the coincidence of the day, writing in the introduction on November the 10th, 1938, on Luther's birthday, the synagogues are burning in Germany. The German people, he urged, ought to heed these words of the greatest anti-Semite of all time, the warner of his people against the Jews. Christopher J. Probst, on his book, Demonizing the Jews, Luther and the Protestant Church. That's right, Luther and the Protestant Church. In Nazi Germany, 2012 shows that a large number of German Lutheran clergy and theologians during the Nazi Third Reich used Luther's hostile publication toward the Jews and their Jewish religion to justify, at least in part, the anti-Semitic policies of the National Socialists. And one thing I want to point out before I continue any further. For a long time, you have heard that it was atheists and occultists who perpetrated these lies and slanders against the Jews during the Third Reich, and the Christians were just mere innocent bystanders in this whole thing. No, that is absolutely false. The Christians were headlong into the Third Reich's madness. I will continue. Published in 1940, Heinrich Himmler wrote admiringly of Luther's writings and sermons on the Jews. The city of Nuremberg presented a first edition on the Jews and their lives to Julius Streicher, editor of the Nazi newspaper Der Stürmer. On his birthday in 1937, the newspaper described it as the most radically anti-Semitic tract ever published. It was publicly exhibited in a glass case in the Nuremberg rallies and quoted in a 54-page explanation of the Aryan law by Dr. E.H. Schultz and Dr. R. Frerichs. On December 17, 1941, 7 Lutheran regional church confederations issued a statement agreeing with the policy of forcing the Jews to wear what? The yellow badge. That's right. The Protestant churches in Germany. And no doubt, if Nazi Germany would have occupied the entire European world, which they nearly succeeded, all of the churches would have agreed to that. And you wonder why I'm wearing the yellow badge right now. I do it in protest against you Christians and your forefathers. I'm doing it in protest against you Christians and you forefathers for what you have done to the Jews. And I do it as a witness against you Christians and your forefathers for what you have done to the Jews. And as a testimony against you, I will continue. I will get even further into the nitty-gritty. Since after his bitter experience, Luther had strongly suggested preventative measures against the Jews and their expulsion from the German territory. Michael states Luther wrote of the Jews as if they were a race that could not truly convert to Christianity. Indeed, like so many Christian writers before him, Luther, by making the Jews the devil's people, put them beyond conversion. He notes that in a sermon of September 25, 1539, Luther tried to demonstrate through several examples that individual Jews could not convert permanently, and in several passages of the Jews and their lies, Luther appeared to reject the possibility that the Jews would or could ever convert. You see, we're getting closer to the truth here of why I wear the yellow badge in my YouTube videos, but we're not quite there yet. Franklin Sherman, editor of volume 47 of the American Editor of Luther's works, in which On the Jews and Their Lies appears, responds to the claim that Luther's antipathy toward the Jews was religious rather than racial in nature. Luther's writings against the Jews, he explained, were not a merely set of cool, calm, and collected theological judgments. His writings are full of rage and indeed hatred against an identifiable human group, not just against a religious point of view. It is against that group that his proposals are directed. Sherman argues that Luther cannot be distanced completely from modern anti-Semites. No, he can't. And neither can Protestant Christianity. We all know what the Catholics did to the Jews, what the Crusaders did to the Jews. You Protestants, you cannot escape your hand, your guilt in the blood of the Jews. You cannot escape. If you call yourself a Protestant, you are one of them. Okay. Sherman argues that Luther cannot be distanced completely from modern anti-Semites. Regarding Luther's treatise On the Jews and Their Lies, the German philosopher Karl Jaspers wrote, "There you already have the whole Nazi program." Yes, you Protestants, you are nose deep in it. Other scholars assert that Luther's anti-Semitism, as expressed on the Jews and Their Lies, is based on religion. Bainton asserts that Luther's position was entirely religious, with no respect racial. The supreme sin for him was the persistent rejection of, as they say, God's revelation of himself in Christos, or Christ. The centuries of Jewish suffering were themselves a mark of divine displeasure. That is not true. I have proven that is not true. See. They should be compelled to leave and go to a land of their own. This was a program of enforced Zionism. And so, when the Jews complied, what happened? Anti-Zionism. So the Jews can't do anything without the world condemning them. I will continue, though. But if it were feasible, then Luther would recommend that the Jews be compelled to live from the soil. He was unwittingly proposing a return to the condition of early Middle Ages, when the Jews had been in agriculture, forced off the land. They had gone into commerce, and having been expelled from commerce, they were forced into money lending. And then, of course, they were cursed by the Christians for money lending, because that was the only thing the Jews were allowed to do. Luther wished to reverse the process, and thereby inadvertently would accord the Jews a more secure position than they enjoyed in his day. Paul Haussel argues that Luther's views was a part in laying the groundwork for racial European anti-Semitism of the 19th century. He writes that although Luther's comments seem to be proto-Nazi, they are better seen as a part of a tradition of medieval Christian anti-Semitism. Well, in this case, he's right on both accounts, which implicates the Catholics. While there is little doubt that Christian anti-Semitism laid the social and cultural basis for modern anti-Semitism, modern anti-Semitism does differ in being based on pseudo-scientific notions of race. The Nazis imprisoned and killed even those ethnic Jews. Listen very carefully, my friends. And here is the kicker. The Nazis imprisoned and killed even those ethnic Jews who had converted to Christianity. Luther, well, actually, it says Luther would have welcomed their conversions. That is also not true, because Martin Luther said Jews could never convert. We just read that. So Paul Halsall, his argument is partly wrong. We just read that Martin Luther agreed with that assessment. Now, what this means is, if a Christian, that's right, a Christian, because that's what Hitler was. Hitler was a Christian. He was a Catholic that espoused Protestant views. And if one came up like him today and took over Europe, even if I were the most dedicated Christian in all of Europe, they would send me to the concentration camps to die because I have Jewish blood in my DNA. That's right. So I will wear the yellow star in protest against Christianity, as a witness against Christianity for their lies, their slander, their pogroms, and their bloodlust against the Jews. But not just against the Jews, but against the Anabaptists, who have Jewish blood running through their veins. No excuses, no ifs, ands, or buts. This is the way it is. This is the reason why I wear the yellow star during my YouTube videos.